Lent. When I heard her present to another group about what the Episcopal Diocese has been doing. And as you all know, my pitch has been that the members of the Episcopal Diocese are really, our sister churches, because we all began in that colonial period as Anglican. So we're all grappling with a number of these same factual situations regarding slavery. And I think we have a lot to learn from what the Episcopal Diocese has done. So Reverend Tucker is at St. Mary's Church in Dorchester, where she's the priest in charge. But today she'll be speaking to us, sharing more widely about the entire diocese. Reverend Tucker.
Yeah, and I also wanted to note the mastermind behind all of the Zoom things, which is Laura. So I also appreciate you, Laura, for working out all of the kinks. I'm going to say a little bit more about what I do on the reparations subcommittee, but I thought first I would open us in prayer. It's nothing creative of my own, but I have been spending my Lent with the Black liturgies, originally found on Instagram as stories, but a queer Black author, Cole Arthur Riley, who had found the Episcopal Church sort of in a moment of desperation, and the Episcopal Church had provided a liturgy when there were no words for her, and then later also needed a liturgy, but the Episcopal Church fell short, and so she created her own. So this prayer is from our first week of Lent, having gone through the temptations or the trial and testing of Jesus, and of course the first test being of hunger. So let us take a moment to gather our breath and gather our attention and redirect that toward God. God of deep hunger, we thank you for being a God who is unconcerned with spiritual practices that don't affirm the dignity of the most vulnerable. Keep us from shallow spiritualities that are more concerned with obedience to ritual than how that ritual should bring about justice and restoration in the world. Retrain our appetites toward healing and liberation. If we fast this Lent, let it be in that ancient way, which gives our portions to the hungry and the oppressed. And if we have need, let this be a season of reclamation, that we would accept what is owed to us, that we would take all that our dignity demands. Grant that we would find our own healing magnified as we participate in the healing of the cosmos. And let our darkest nights amplify the light, that we would look up and see no less than the very face of God in one another. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, thank you all for having me this evening. As Joy mentioned, as Joy introduced me, I am the Reverend Tamra Tucker. I use she, her pronouns. I am the priest in charge at St. Mary's in Dorchester, which is a predominantly Caribbean Islander church. And I represent the reparations subcommittee of the Racial Justice Commission for the Diocese of Massachusetts. So I would like to share with you a bit about what led me to being here tonight, which is the presentation that I gave to the People's Reparations Commission in Boston back in January. There is a lot of information and we have some time, but I'm gonna make sure to leave some time for conversation and questions. I often find that more than anything, people want their concerns or fears or questions to be heard. And so I want to offer that to you tonight. But first, I want to tell you about the diocesan reparations journey. And I first want to say that we are in no way experts on reparations. We are very behind the curve on a lot of things. We are ahead of some people in the process, but it is a cyclical process. And so there is never a moment where we don't return back to learning and educating and listening, which is exactly where you all are right now. So we are on the journey together. And it may feel like to be at different points. And in some ways we're in the same spot. So on November 7th in 2020, a resolution was submitted and approved by the Convention of the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts titled A Call for Repentance and Reparations, calling upon our baptismal covenant to persevere in resisting evil, and whenever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord. Calling upon the Very Reverend Canon Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary, who says reparations are about looking forward, not just looking back. And of course, calling upon the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his letter from Birmingham jail when he said, as we know, now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. Calling upon all of those people, 39 co-sponsors put forward a call to reparations in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic crisis, and the public focus on police brutality in the summer of 2020. This call was directed towards the trustees of donations of the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts, to each congregation of the diocese, to each diocesan-related organization, as well as to all individual Episcopalians and families to participate in meaningful action towards reparations. This resolution called for the people of the diocese to prayerfully and purposefully explore their historic involvement in and present wealth derived from the forced labor of enslaved people. To do so, the creation of the Reparations Subcommittee, to be under the authority of the newly developed Racial Justice Commission, would be responsible for taking up this work. This committee was initially tasked to provide two things. One was to prepare a toolbox of resources and expertise to assist congregations and individual Episcopalians in the examination of their assets and history. And we'll get much more into the toolbox later on. And the second was to explore models and best practices for the creation of a reparations fund, and to report to the next diocesan convention on their recommendations for remedies, including the distribution of funds from the unrestricted and restricted endowments of the diocese. So the reparations had a lot of work to do. It was formed and underway by March of 2021, working diligently to create the reparations toolkit for public use and studying and interviewing other dioceses and institutions that were ahead of us in the creation of reparations funds to discern and provide best practices. So us, like you, are trying to learn from other people who have created these funds. The toolkit was created in 4 documents laid out, including a Reparations 101, simply to describe the ways in which these people in this moment were understanding the work of reparations, as there are many, many definitions of reparations. We then gave a brief history of the Diocese of Massachusetts' involvement in the enslavement of African and Afro-Caribbean descendants, and provided a 4-page list of resources and recommended readings. We then created an audacious template for the process of working towards reparations. An incomplete and flawed template, this document is meant to break down the feeling of overwhelm that typically stops people from ever trying to approach reparations. The template breaks the process of reparations down into 4 phases: learning the truth, telling the truth, beginning repair outside of financial giving, because reparations is so much bigger than financial giving, and finally, beginning repair including financial giving, because it can never be without that finance. It holds the value of broadening the truths we already know to include the truths we do not yet know, correcting our historical and present day understandings, documents, monuments, education systems, social, political, and economic systems oppressed by white supremacy, and building a holistic approach to repair the broken relationships in our common human family. The template holds that reparations is so much more than financial giving, and it also must include financial giving. Lastly, the template is cyclical. We are never done, and once we think we are done, we must begin again. The templates and all other documents that I'm mentioning regarding our reparations work is on the diocesan webpage, and we will pull that up and look at that together after this brief presentation. The toolkit is a living document, always in need of revision. If you find yourself combing through it after this evening and have suggestions or questions, you can reach out to me since I'm in charge of making those edits. Following the creation of the template and the work of gathering resources and best practices, we reported to the next convention our findings and proposed a new resolution to initiate a year of study and spiritual reflection, realizing that we had so much more to learn, to gather stories, to hold listening sessions across the diocese and across demographics, to embody our work through our Lenten disciplines, and offer support to begin using the resources the committee had created. The committee held 9 listening sessions in May of 2022, where the committee opened up to the people's thoughts, feelings, concerns, and questions when they hear the word reparations. So just at the very, very beginning of trying to understand where the people in the diocese are, all of the emotions that come out of just hearing the word reparations is really where we started. The Reparations Committee commissioned the Reverend Katie Capurso Ernst and their colleague Hazel Monet to create the Lenten study series to help the people of the diocese embody the work of reparations through 6 small group sessions. The study series can be used at any time of the year and can also be found in the reparations toolkit. So after your Lenten series this year, if you want to do an Eastertide series, or a Pentecost series or an Advent series, you can use that study series. A massive project began under the expertise of Alden Fawcett to investigate our history as a diocese. We have released a history report under the title, "And You Will Know the Truth, and the Truth Will Make You Free, a historical framework from 1620 to 1840, for understanding how the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts benefits today from chattel slavery and its legacy." It's a very long title. In it, 13 of our earliest churches in our diocese are described through the lens of the wealth they have gained from chattel slavery. The following year, in 2023, the Reparations Subcommittee, through very long and tender work, drafted a resolution to create a reparations fund at the minimum of $11.1 million. The fund would be launched with a base of $3 million drawn from 3 major assets of the diocese. Those 3 assets are the council-designated and unrestricted agency funds, the unrestricted trusts held by the trustees of donations, and the unrestricted bishop-directed funds that were proposed to the bishop, though we have no control. The bishop has to buy in, has to say yes to that. Congregations, worshiping communities, individuals, and families are all encouraged to either create their own fund or contribute to the diocesan fund. The fund would also be governed by a fund committee that is made up of people predominantly from the affected communities that have been harmed. And that is the biggest, most important guiding principle that we have of our fund, is that the people who are deciding where the money goes are the people from communities that have been harmed. The resolution passed nearly unanimously, though We know that there were some that did not vote, some that left the room, and some that felt pressured to vote yes. In the aftermath of the past resolution, the reparations subcommittee was set to 3 main tasks. The first is to establish guiding principles for the fund committee, knowing that we would not be the body governing the money ourselves, and that there would be no crossover in membership. We would create guiding principles, we could make recommendations to the bishop for nominations, and we would support the creation of the committee as best as possible. But once the fund committee is created, our hands are off of the authority of that fund. The second is that we still held the task of collecting stories of harm and continuing the work of truth-telling in our diocese. Black Episcopalians are invited to tell their stories, and they are recorded and temporarily kept confidential until the time comes for that truth to be shared more broadly. And the third is that we continue to the task of supporting congregations in their discernment and work towards reparations, making visitations and providing training or guidance on their journey. We have visited with over 27 worshiping communities in the diocese and have also made presentations such as these to organizations outside or in relationship with the Episcopal Church. The fund committee has only recently been announced, so they are still trying to figure out the scope of their work. But with that fund committee being launched and the fund beginning its capital build, our work refocuses to the slow and steady journey towards reparations in our diocese. Truth-telling, truth-learning, correction and reconnection, supporting communities and individuals in their work, and hopefully one day, full holistic repair. So that's a lot of information, and very broad. But that is a very brief history of the Diocese of Massachusetts work towards reparations. The subcommittee just met this morning, and with the fund committee having been established, we are tasked with making clear what our purpose is as a reparations subcommittee. And I would say, just as an individual, not as a representative, the fund committee is really focused on that phase 4 of reparations, the building repair through financial contributions. The reparations subcommittee is concerned with the other 3 phases: learning the truth, telling the truth, and repair outside of financial giving. And that is predominantly where my expertise will be in this conversation, though I can't truly say that I'm an expert in it. I just do it a lot, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're an expert in anything. So I do want to, before we get to the Q&A, I want to take a moment to show you the toolkit. So thank you, Laura. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one moment. Okay, can everyone see the screen, the toolkit? This is as simple as possible, diomass.org/reparations-toolkit. I have this bookmarked because I use it a lot, and people ask for the resource a lot. So, and if you are beginning your journey as well, you can just bookmark it and go back to it often. So the toolkit has a lot of links on it. So I just want to show you what it looks like. You'll typically see this this art piece that we are using with permissions. That is on all of our reparations work. And then you'll find several of our resolutions that we've submitted to conventions. You'll find a call for repentance and reparations from 2020, and you'll find the Racial Justice Commission's subcommittee on reparations. I cannot commend more than anything the historical framework that Alden Fawcett has done. A true archivist and also a postulant for holy orders in the diocese. He has done phenomenal work and very diligent work to uncover a lot of our history. This section is the four documents that I mentioned earlier. And if you want to see what the Reparations 101 is, these 3 links are very simple. The resource and suggested reading might be a little outdated, but is always a good place to start if you're at the beginning. And then a process towards reparations, a template, is really where the meat of that is. I'm going to click on this, but before I do, I want to just acknowledge that the rest of these links are the Lenten study series that I mentioned, based on the scripture when Jesus is on trial, and Pilate asks, kind of as a throwaway question, what is truth? And then walks away without any answer being given. And so in our desire to know a broader truth, the way I typically explain what we're trying to do is we may have a movie that we play about our history, whether it's, VHS or a DVD or however old you want to go with it. And it may be in a typical normal screen. And what we want is to widen the screen because there's always something else that we're missing. And so we want a widescreen history, as wide as possible. And so in order to find that other truth that is just not being shown, we went through this Lenten series of trying to settle the work of reparations into our bodies, because if we don't do that, we can't do the work with integrity. My favorite, I'll say, is the session 2, moving with tension. It gives you an opportunity to play with a rubber band, just to experience what tension feels like in such a small way, before you expand what tension looks like in your conversations around reparations. So, can you all see the template, the process towards reparations? Is that up, or is it still the
No, it's up, but not everyone here is sighted. So just make sure you explain.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
But the template is up. It's not. Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple more minutes on this, and because I want to have more of a conversation. So this is what the template looks like. It's 25 pages, but please don't get too intimidated by that. It isn't that hard to get through. What we typically find on our visitations is we do an assessment. We often go in pairs. I don't have my pair tonight, but we often go in pairs, and we will ask people where they think they are in the work towards reparations, as far as what phase of the template they are in. And then after our visitation, we'll reflect with them about where we think that they might be. And it's we typically have to backtrack a little bit. People really, really want to get to the showy work really fast, without doing the nitty-gritty work that really needs to be done before making a show of it. So people might want to do a liturgy of repentance without having done the education and the discernment around what they are really repenting. And so we often invite people to start from the beginning as best as they can. And then throughout the whole process, education is in all of it. And so you're never going to know enough And so that can't be the thing that keeps you from making the next step. Education is necessary and can also be a barrier, especially with white people. As a white person who talks to a lot of white people about reparations, the perfection is a tool of white supremacy, in the sense that it keeps us from action. Because when we say, oh, I don't know enough, or I'm not an expert in this, or I don't want to embarrass myself, or I don't want to do it disingenuously, it keeps us from action. And so then the system of white supremacy works. It keeps us from action. So education is within all of the phases and can never be the thing that keeps us from taking the next step. So we have an invitation to the work by the reparations subcommittee, and we invite people to read that. And then the framework of the committee itself. Actually, I'll just stay on the table of contents for you for a moment. So as I mentioned before, the phases are broken into 4 phases: learning the truth, the what of the matter, what are we doing here, and then telling the truth, the so what. So we've learned what the thing is and what do we do about it, and then beginning repair, and then paying repair, and throughout each section. So I think I'll skip to phase 2, to telling the truth. It's broken down into more bite-sized things. So you'll have sections for taking action. You'll have sections for conversation questions. Ideally, you will have a small group that is leading the work that you're doing before getting to the church-wide work, because when it's too big, there are just way too many questions to make any kind of progress. So listening sessions are really good to get information, but you need a small core of people to be doing the work to keep it moving. So you have those conversation questions with your people. And then there are sometimes little nuggets of information for people to consider. Consider that reparations is more than making money, or consider reparations is more than putting up a statue, or consider reparations is more than just writing checks to individuals. And so it will ask you to look at all of the ways in which repair is needed. So that will frequently pop up as well. And those three subjects are typically what you'll see. So consider this, the information, the conversation questions, that's really where the work is. You should be asking yourself these questions and so many more, but these are just starting points that should be asked. How does your information change your understanding? You should really know that if you're trying to have a public narrative about reparations. And then taking action, making sure that people are empowered to do something. So they are suggestions, and it certainly isn't exclusive. There are so many other things. It is a very incomplete document, but it is a starting off point. And then, of course, always bringing in your community. I think the 2 things that continue throughout the entire document is education and community. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen, and so that we can see each other's faces. And yeah, so I'll just wrap up that thought. Those 2 things, education and community. Reparations cannot be done in silos. It cannot be done. You cannot just like make up your mind that this is the thing that you need to repair, and then you do the repair, and then and then you're done, and then you're healed and everybody else is healed. That's not how reparations work, because for something to be broken, you need a relationship. And so that those two themes go through the entire thing. And then once you get to the end of that template, it literally just asks you to go to the beginning and start again. Because as I have mentioned and can continue to mention, it is very cyclical. We are never done with reparations. It was a long time of broken relationship, and broken bodies and broken spirits, and a broken world. And so we have a really, really long time to go, and none of us will see that end in our lifetime. So, so I'm going to stop there, and open up for questions and conversations. Laura, I may ask for your help, just in how I'm not, or Joy, like, I don't know how you would like to do it, but we can either put questions in the chat, or we can use the option of raising your hand, whatever way y'all are.
I think we should not use the chat.
Okay, okay. Oh,
Yes.
right. Some people, okay, are on their phone.
Let's just raise our hands as we want to say something. I right now have you spotlighted, so I don't have my whole screen up there. Let me see if I can do that. Good. Okay, got it. So now I can see most of you, although I think we go on to 2 pages. Isn't that exciting? So if you have questions, Tamra, I want to thank you very much for that presentation. I think in terms of providing us not only what you did, but as we can delve into it more deeply, it's extremely helpful to us. And your observations about learning and learning and learning the history, and then the work with the community. I just wanted to ask one question. By community, do you mean the community of your church, or do you mean the community beyond your church, or what were you meaning?
Yeah, predominantly what we're meaning in the template are the communities that have been harmed, the communities that are not only the descendants of enslaved Africans or Caribbean people, but also the communities that hold the legacy of slavery. So, I mean, we know that the legacy of slavery is much more than those that have been enslaved and freed. And there are conversations to have between that relationship, people who are the actual descendants versus people who simply experience racism in the world. But predominantly, we mean the communities that have been harmed. And that can be people in your congregation or in your own communities, but typically the homogeny of oh, I am still the host, so I'm going to switch. I'm going to let Amanda in, and then I'm going to give the host rights back to Laura, if that's okay.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Amanda. So how about questions that you all might have? I just gave out mine. Don't hesitate, just please raise your hand, or you can use the hand icon.
Tim Nelson?
Tim Nelson Hoy?
Yeah,
Nelson
as you mentioned, this is going to be a long project. I wondered how you dealt with um uh uh getting new members of the congregation up to speed when you know, you're multi-years into the process of educating and uh um you know, working with the longtime members.
Yeah, great question. So I guess we are getting to a point in the diocesan work where we are needing to update people on the work. The part of some of the suggestions that are found in phase 2 are finding a place to hold your information that you are telling. So I believe, don't you already have something on your website? Yeah, that's what I thought. So having that place, and then making sure that it's a commitment, either once a year or twice a year, or even quarterly if you really want. I don't know how frequently y'all are getting new members, but to have either reports or newsletters or listening sessions or up-to-date sessions, but making sure that those are just planted in the calendar, so that people can either be brought up to speed who are new, or people are staying informed with the progress you're making. I mean, there are tons of ways to do it, I think, but those are just a couple.
Alan?
First of all, thank you very much. It's really helpful to know what you've done, and that's a terrific resource for us. And I'm sure we'll be back in conversation with you if you don't mind.
Oh, good.
Going forward.
This is what I'm here for.
Good. I wanted to follow up just quickly on Joy's question. You may not be able to do this in this context for confidentiality reasons and a lot of other reasons. It would help me to know a little bit more about the specific kinds of, when we talk about communities, are we talking about schools, churches, neighborhood groups? Are we talking about individuals that you identify? Because that's been a question for me all along, is how we do that identification. And if you could say maybe another word or two about specific connections of communities that you've involved in this, that might be helpful. But again, if you can't do that for confidentiality or other reasons, I think I'd understand. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I can say a little bit more without breaking any kind of confidentialities, especially for churches who are predominantly white. It can be a challenge to try to create a relationship with communities of color that, for them, it seems like they're making that connection and relationship out of a desire for reparation when they don't have a relationship to begin with. And it gets bad fast. So our suggestion, or even just my personal suggestion, would be to make connections with organizations that are already doing the work as a supporter. And then through your activism with those organizations, start to build relationships with people in that way. It just takes a Google search, and it may take a little more work if you don't have the right keywords, but there are tons of organizations doing the work of caring for marginalized communities in Boston. So throwing your support into one, I know we were talking earlier, Joy and I, or no, maybe it wasn't. I think it was at our reparations meeting. There have been people in other churches that have started to visit other congregations and have found, just to broaden their own experience, not out of any kind of, I want to, I see you as an outreach opportunity, just to broaden their experience. They have found that their churches have deeper connections from their history. And so they have started to kind of unearth those together, and start to build new relationships through that. But that's not always a given. You're not always going to find that. So really leaning into supporting organizations is the easiest way to go about that. Is that helpful?
Yes, that's very helpful.
Okay.
That's very helpful.
More hands? Okay, Stephen Courtney.
I second Alan's appreciation of what you guys have done, and this is going to be a real resource for us. I have two questions while I've got the floor. One is I'm real curious beyond the Massachusetts diocese, if this is gaining ground in other places in the United States. And the other one is kind of a detailed question. You mentioned that you started out at a $3 million goal, I think, but then you mentioned 11.1 million. I was just curious how that might have grown from the community's needs. How did those numbers come about? Was it just what's available? I don't know. Interesting question.
Yeah. I love the questions about money. So it actually started at 11.1. In truth, though, it started around 10 million, and people will ask, like, why 11.1? That's such an odd number. And when I think people have quoted the Right Reverend Eugene Sutton, who has done in Maryland, who has done a lot of reparations work. The figure is not a mathematical one, it is a moral one, not a mathematical computation anyway. We could try to mathematically compute. There are formulas that people have come up with to find a reasonable, to find an accurate number, and we needed to make a decision faster, and one that would actually get us started. So it's a minimum of 11.1, though I don't anticipate we'll stop there. And then that will eventually go into a fund, but to start off the fund is the $3 million number. So and that $3 million comes from those three different sources. So the reason that it's 11.1 instead of 10 is because of the 1.1 that would come out on top from the bishop's directed fund, and because we can't actually vote by convention to direct those funds, we can only suggest that the bishop do it. It's not an assurance, but that 1.1 would put us over. So we wanted the assurance of 10 million with the goal of 11.1, provided that whatever bishop we had gotten, because we since now have a new bishop, that bishop would also be on board with starting that fund, or with designating their own directed funds that way. So the only other thing that I'll say about the fund is that we needed it to be enough to be felt, like it needs to hurt a little bit, but not so much that it would get shut down. I will say that 11.1 is nowhere near enough. It is absolutely not enough. It is actually laughable in a lot of ways to a lot of people. It will also take us about 35 years to build up to the 11.1 because of how we are getting that money. The money after the $3 million is accumulated through the top 3% of our diocesan assessments. So each congregation, you all don't have to worry about this part for how you're structured in your governance, but in the Episcopal Church, all of the Episcopal churches pay to the diocese an assessment based on our own income as congregations. And so from those assessments, the top 3% will always go into this reparations fund. We've voted on that, and we've chosen to do that. That's not like the dregs, that's not whatever's left, that is just off the top, to make sure that stays as a priority. And then does that answer your question about the money?
Very good. And just a corollary is, you mentioned non-monetary repair. It would be interesting to hear some examples of that as well.
Absolutely. But before I get to that, you also had a question about outside of the diocese. So we are behind the work from about nine different dioceses and Episcopal institutions, including Virginia Theological Seminary, Diocese of Texas, Diocese of Newark, Diocese of Virginia, and several others. And so we really just called them and met with them to get as much information as possible about how they came up with their numbers, how their disbursement is going. Like, there's, I think, only one, maybe two at this point, but at the time there had only been one other organization that had actually started giving out money. So we still have a lot to learn from them. And since we have started, there are a lot of other outside of the diocese institutions that have started their own reparations work. And I'm a little less familiar with them, but I do know that Boston has started their work a little bit behind us, but they might be able to make action happen faster than we can because of how our governance is. And then the non-monetary, that is, so the toolkit will provide a lot of those ways, but let me pull it up real quick. Predominantly, we're looking at the systems. So your HR systems, how you do hiring, how you find a new priest, or how you hire your administrators, how our education systems work, our governing systems work, a lot of correcting history. I think you all have a statue being built, right? I think you also might have, because there's so much history in your space, you also have a lot of information that is posted around your building, right?
Right.
And so part of repairing is to be telling the truth, the fuller truth, right? The broader truth. So it may, I have definitely been in your space, but it has been a very long time since I was new to Boston and enjoyed the Freedom Trail. So I imagine, and I know not just for your space, or not your space at all, but in other spaces, that plaques of people that you are proud of in your history might include all of the things that you really like about those people and all of their accomplishments. But it doesn't always tell the deeper, harder truths. And so it's not just putting up a new monument, but also correcting a lot of the history that is already told. And that is one of the biggest ways in which we're looking at repairs that are not simply handing out money. And then the other biggest way is, of course, your vote. Knowing who, especially in Boston, who supports the votes, who are hurt by votes, the organizations that you're looking into, questioning where they stand on certain votes, who are the laws that you're voting on, like who does it hurt, and considering other people's voices before simply voting your own conscience, but also your own interest, right? So those are some of the ways in which we're looking at reparations outside of money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How about Deborah Holt and then James?
I want to third the appreciation already made, Tamra,
Thank
for
you.
such an informative session. I'm just not clear about reparations, the financial aspect of it. And this is more a general question. Are they intended for individuals or for services and community entities that that support those communities?
Yeah. A lovely question that doesn't have a super clear answer, because the clearest answer that I can give you is yes. They they are all of those things. And depending on who you're talking to, they will have a different definition of what reparations is. I go to a lot of reparations groups that are all working towards reparations, and they all have a different understanding of what those reparations are. What the Diocese of Massachusetts is doing is different than governmental reparations. So one of the questions that I've gotten in at a different congregation is, if people receive reparations from us, does that make them ineligible for governmental reparations? I don't have that answer. I have no idea. That's something that I have to then go figure out. The way that our diocese is doing reparations is not is we are trying to be clear about a few things. You do not have to be a descendant of an enslaved person in order to be eligible for support from our reparations fund. The other thing that I really need to specify here, though, is that as a white person, I am very clear that my job is to make sure that reparations happens, but it's also very much not my job to decide where that money goes. The people who are within the communities that have been harmed or are still faced with the legacy of slavery, they need to decide, because they are going to know where they need support. And so they need to decide where that money should go. And getting that kind of firsthand authority into their hands is the most important part of reparations, because you are giving them the power to decide what kind of support they need. Otherwise, you're kind of just looking at handouts. If it's your money that you acquired from owning people, and then you get to decide where that money goes, it's not exactly the kind of repair that we're trying to create in our diocese. We want restoration to God and to one another, and we're not going to do that if we keep the power dynamic like this. So there are a lot of answers to your question, and even communities of color and communities that have been harmed are in discord about those answers. So it really depends on who you're talking to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to
James.
note that, before James goes, I want to note that it's 6:02. If we have your permission, Tamra, and others, let's try another 10 minutes and then we can assess. But does that work for people on this call?
I can do another
Know
10.
that you can always go. All right. But James, and then I think Anne, you had wanted to speak, hadn't you too? Well, I know she has, so we'll try her as well. Okay, and Cynthia. Oh, what happened to James?
James is there.
I'm right here.
Go right ahead.
Wanted to ask about, you mentioned, I believe at the beginning, that your particular parish is primarily Afro-Caribbean. What the role, whether in the Boston Diocese or any other diocese considering reparations, of primarily Black parishes, which in a sense are on each side of the equation? And if anything, imagining that could be a very strong resource that I am non-maliciously envious of, so to speak.
I'm sorry, what's your question?
What is the role of Black Episcopal parishes in all of this, since that seemed to be a somewhat unique role of the confluence of both the diocese giving the reparations, but also the communities harmed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So by and large, the Black churches, the Black Episcopal churches, are being tapped to be the governing body. Because it is an Episcopal institution, because the money is still held within the Episcopal institution, that can give, there's still a power dynamic and authority within the diocese, but we're trying our best to make sure that the people who are actually governing the money and deciding where it goes, that those people are within the communities that are closest to understanding where that money where it should be going. So they are our leaders. The St. Mary's is a bit of an oddball. It's about 55% Caribbean Islander. So it's not super overwhelming, and it's in Upham's Corner, so on Jones Hill. So it also has a lot of white history, and so and they have a white priest that the other Black churches do not have at the moment. But so it's a balance for us. And I will also say that the Caribbean Islander relationship to racial justice and to reparations is very different than the African American and African diaspora. So and I'm very new there. I haven't even been there a year yet. So St. Mary's is not really in that conversation as much right now. But they know that I'm doing this work. And the leaders from the other churches are doing what they got to do, which is to lead and to hold their own authority as best as possible.
Cynthia?
Yeah, I just want to applaud with everyone else. What an amazing work. It seems so broad in scope, and you've done an amazing job in laying out this template. I have a couple questions. One is, most churches, our church and every church I've ever known of has always had a community action or a community service component. And how is that community service as reparations? What's the difference? I mean, I think in some ways our churches have been giving back to communities that are in need. And I guess what I'm hearing is that a fund called reparations that then has to have some parameters and this whole kind of conversation in the community is what makes it different. That was one question. My other is, do you have some examples or an example of a church that has done and where they are in these 4 steps of your toolkit? So those are my 2 kind of bubbling questions for what they're worth.
Sorry, the second was, sorry, I was taking a note. The second was other congregations that are in the work.
Well, do you have some examples of?
Oh, yeah. Examples of, yeah, absolutely.
I guess the other question is, have we been doing reparations all along, but it just wasn't called that? And now, because we know the history, we need to call it reparations and really have, the giving, then the giving of reparations requires a receiver who is receiving it as reparations. Am I correct? And so there needs to be a dollar figure and I guess that's I'm throwing out kind of a jumbled question there.
Yeah. So I'm gonna throw out a word there that you have not used, but it's what it sounds like to me, and so you can push back on it. It sounds like you're asking about what the difference is between charity and reparations.
Oh, that's good. I guess maybe that is.
So charity is a broad term for giving, and you can direct those gifts to communities that have been harmed by the legacy of slavery. You can. Reparations are typically a more specific form of compensation for harms caused by human rights violations. And so you are looking at specific communities or individuals or organizations that are trying to actually repair the harm that was done by slavery, rather than giving your charitable gifts to people in need. So there is a difference between the intention, and I would say that you have not been doing reparations if you have not been going through that process of repairing the harm and actual repair and compensation of the harm that has been caused by the legacy of slavery, specifically your legacy, as the church.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then examples, tons of examples. So my go-to example right now is Emmanuel Church on Newberry Street. One of the in phase one, we would talk about how to form your committee or your team that is going to do the hard work of reparations and is going to be the people who are open to other people's input, but are going to be responsible for taking actions and then reporting and including and broadening the work into the larger congregation and community. So they have over, I guess, the last couple of years now, have really been working on understanding their history, really pulling into the weeds in archives, into the libraries, and into the records of where they have received all of their wealth. The cathedral has done a little bit of their work, and within their work, they found that while like most of Boston, right, the stones are coming from like the Roxbury quarries, right, but their pillars actually at the cathedral were mined from Virginia. Very, there's no way that it wasn't quarried by enslaved persons and brought up. So that's, one example of just digging through the weeds to find the broader truth, the deeper truth that nobody really wants to tell. And then Emmanuel has also committed to reporting out. So that part of their truth telling is they have a newsletter that goes out about their progress, their progress reports that they give. So they're still in the first couple of phases, but they're also really committing to being in relationship with people like the Black and White reparative. What is it? It was a really long title. Joy, I don't know if you remember it, but the people who were from the People's Reparations Mission that were hosting the vigil for the Martin Luther King Jr. Day. They are hearing some pretty rough, challenging demands from people who are seeking reparations from them. And they're holding that with integrity. So there's someone who I point to a lot.
Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you.
So I'm feeling, since it's 6:13, that we should probably cut this off. But are any hugely pressing concern? Tamra, we know where she lives. No, actually I don't, but
you at least know where I work.
Yes, exactly. And she was so gracious, the first person I asked to be part of this series and instantly responded. So very helpful as a kickoff for this, our learning. Anybody else pressing question for the moment? Okay, on that note, I'm going to say just a quick prayer and we'll leave. Oh God, we thank you for the gift of all the people on this call, interested and concerned and willing to listen humbly. We thank you especially for Reverend Tamra Tucker and the years worth of work that she has done and explained so well to us. Guide us as we seek to know the way forward for King's Chapel. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, thank you
Thank
all.
you all. Yeah, thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you for leaning into the work of reparations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Thank you all for coming.